Hi all. In this video, I would like to discuss materialism and non-reductionism in connection with the cultural studies. Cultural studies has, for the most part, been concerned with the modern industrialized economies and media cultures organized along capitalist lines. You're already familiar with cultural studies and its connection with the Marxism, and you may know that cultural studies has a neo-Marxian perspective in it. So it has been concerned with the modern industrialized economies and media cultures organized along capitalist lines. Here, representations are produced by corporations who are driven by the profit motive. So this is one criticism cultural studies has been raising for a long time. In this context, cultural studies has developed a form of cultural materialism that is concerned to explore how and why meanings are inscribed at the moment of production. So, just like any other Marxian school of thought, cultural studies has also been developing a form of cultural materialism that is concerned to explore how and why meanings are inscribed at the moment of production. That is, as well as being centered on signifying practices, cultural studies tries to connect them with the political economy. There is a discipline concerned with the power and the distribution of economic and social resources. So basically, political economy and also Marxism has been concerned with the power and the distribution of economic and social resources. Consequently, cultural studies has been concerned with who owns and controls cultural production, the distribution mechanisms for cultural products, the consequences of patterns of ownership and control for contours of the cultural landscape. So these are some of the issues cultural studies has been raising: who owns and controls, the distribution mechanism, and the consequences of patterns of ownership. These has been the have been the issues of cultural studies for a long time. But there is one crucial difference between cultural studies and the classical Marxist thought. He says that, having said that, one of the central tenets of cultural studies is its non-reductionism. Culture is seen as having its own specific meanings, rules, and practices which are not reducible, uh, to or explainable solely in terms of another category or level of a social formation. In particular, cultural studies has waged a battle against economic determinism. So, if you are familiar with the Marxian thought, you may be familiar with the terms like base and superstructure in the classical Marxian thought. Marx has come out with the uh, architectural analogy of base and superstructure. The base of every society is the economic base, economic aspects, who controls means of production, the distribution process, everything, and every other thing is part of the superstructure, like culture, education, art, music, everything is part of superstructure, and the economic base determines, shapes, controls the superstructure and maintains. So this is the classical Marxian thought, which is again criticized as the economic determinism, because everything has been narrowed down to an economic aspect, which has been one of the criticisms leveled against Marxian thought. So here, cultural studies is also not as accepting the crude base and superstructure model. So they say that culture is seen as having its own specific meanings, rules, and practices which are not reducible to or explainable solely in terms of another category or level of a social formation. In particular, it has waged a battle against economic determinism, that is, the attempt to explain what a cultural text mean by reference to its place in the production process. So we cannot determine its place, a cultural text, with reference to its production process, the place in the production process. For cultural studies, the processes of political economy do not determine the meanings of text or their appropriation by audiences. Rather, political economy, social relationships, and culture must be understood in terms of their specific logics and modes of development. So each has its own logic and modes of development, whether it is economics or politics or culture, dance, or whatever, art or music. It has its own modes of development. Each of these domains is articulated or related together in context specific ways. The non-reduction of cultural studies insists that questions of class, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, nation, and age have their own particularities which cannot be reduced either to political economy or to each other. So I think here is one of the central failures of the communist parties, especially in India and other countries, because they try to understand everything based on the class aspect. So, but on the other hand, cultural studies insist that the question of class, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, nation, and age have their own particularities, which cannot be reduced either to political economy or to each other. For example, issues of race should not be explained solely in terms of class. The same way in India, the caste issue has been trying, the communist parties were trying to understand it just based on the class aspect, but that was their failure. So equally, each is implicated in the other. Thus, to explore the question of nationality, for example, is to understand how it has been generated. So similarly, in order to understand nationalism, so we have these theories like nation as an imagined community. So we have seen how class played a, especially capitalism played a crucial role in the development of nationalism. But at the same time, you cannot just reduce everything to an economic formula. Nations are commonly spoken of as female. That is also another concern, and the notion of race is connected to the idea of the ascent of man. So where comes the origin of race? Maybe a chosen race or chosen man in the Bible, or as Renaissance rationalism has talked about a highly, maybe that may be the place where it has been originated. So these are some of the concerns within culture studies, and the thing that we need to remember is that even though cultural studies try to understand everything based on an economic perspective in connection with the political economy, and tries to criticize the capitalist modes or the activities driven by the profit motive conglomerates, but at the same time they are not trying to reduce everything to an economic formula, which is very important in understanding cultural studies in general. I hope you understand. Thank you.